William James. Personal. In William James, the voice and the speech and the very turn of phrase are American. He pounced eagerly upon such characteristic expressions as cash value and results and profits in order to bring his thought within the ken of the man in the street. He spoke not with the aristocratic reserve of a Santayana or a Henry James, but in a racy vernacular and with a force and directness which made his philosophy of pragmatism and reserve energy the mental correlate of the practical and strenuous Roosevelt. And at the same time he phrased for the common man that tender-minded trust in the essentials of the old theology which lives side by side in the American soul with the realistic spirit of commerce and finance, and with the tough, persistent courage that turned a wilderness into a promised land. William James was born in New York City in 1842. His father was a Swedenborgian mystic, whose mysticism did no damage to his wit and humor, and the son was not lacking in any of the three. After some seasons in American private schools, William was sent with his brother Henry, 1 year his junior, to private schools in France. There they fell in with the work of Charcot and other psychopathologists, and took, both of them, a turn to psychology. One of them, to repeat an old phrase, proceeded to write fiction like psychology, while the other wrote psychology like fiction. Henry spent most of his life abroad and finally became a British citizen. Through his more continuous contact with European culture, he acquired a maturity of thought which his brother missed. But William, returning to live in America, felt the stimulation of a nation young in heart and rich in opportunity and hope, and caught so well the spirit of his age and place that he was lifted on the wings of the zeitgeist to a lonely pinnacle of popularity such as no other American philosopher had ever known. He took his M.D. at Harvard in 1870 and taught there from 1872 to his death in 1910, at first anatomy and physiology, and then psychology, and at last philosophy. His greatest achievement was almost his first, The Principles of Psychology, 1890. A fascinating mixture of anatomy, philosophy, and analysis. For in James, psychology still drips from the fetal membranes of its mother, metaphysics. Yet the book remains the most instructive and easily the most absorbing summary of its subject. Something of the subtlety which Henry put into his clauses helped William James to the keenest introspection which psychology had witnessed since the uncanny clarity of David Hume. This passion for illuminating analysis was bound to lead James from psychology to philosophy, and at last back to metaphysics itself. He argued, against his own positive inclinations, that metaphysics is merely an effort to think things out clearly, and he defined philosophy, in his simple and pellucid manner, as only thinking about things in the most comprehensive possible way. So, after 1900, his publications were almost all in the field of philosophy. He began with The Will to Believe, 1897. Then, after a masterpiece of psychological interpretation, Varieties of Religious Experience, 1902, he passed on to his famous books on pragmatism, 1907, A Pluralistic Universe, 1909, and The Meaning of Truth, 1909. A year after his death came Some Problems of Philosophy, 1911, and later an important volume of Essays in Radical Empiricism, 1912. We must begin our study with this last book, because it was in these essays that James formulated most clearly the bases of his philosophy. Pragmatism. The direction of his thought is always to things, and if he begins with psychology, it is not as a metaphysician who loves to lose himself in ethereal obscurities, but as a realist to whom thought, however distinct it may be from matter, is essentially a mirror of external and physical reality. And it is a better mirror than some have believed. It perceives and reflects not merely separate things, as Hume supposed, but their relations too. It sees everything in a context. And the context is as immediately given in perception as the shape and touch and odor of the thing. Hence the meaninglessness of Kant's problem of knowledge. How do we put sense and order into our sensations? The sense and the order, in outline at least, are already there. The old atomistic psychology of the English school, which conceived thought as a series of separate ideas mechanically associated, is a misleading copy of physics and chemistry. Thought is not a series, it is a stream, a continuity of perception and feeling, in which ideas are passing nodules like corpuscles in the blood. We have mental states, though this is again a misleadingly static term, that correspond to prepositions, verbs, adverbs, and conjunctions, as well as states that reflect the nouns and pronouns of our speech. We have feelings of for and to and against and because and behind and after, as well as of matter and men. It is these transitive elements in the flow of thought that constitute the thread of our mental life and give us some measure of the continuity of things. Consciousness is not an entity, not a thing, but a flux and system of relations. It is a point at which the sequence and relationship of thoughts coincide illuminatingly with the sequence of events and the relationship of things. In such moments it is reality itself, and no mere phenomenon that flashes into thought. For beyond phenomena and appearances there is nothing. Nor is there any need of going beyond the experience process to a soul. The soul is merely the sum of our mental life, as the noumenon is simply the total of all phenomena, and the absolute the web of the relationships of the world. It is this same passion for the immediate and actual and real that led James to pragmatism. Brought up in the school of French clarity, he abominated the obscurities and pedantic terminology of German metaphysics. And when Harris and others began to import a moribund Hegelianism into America, James reacted like a quarantine officer who has detected an immigrant infection. He was convinced that both the terms and the problems of German metaphysics were unreal, and he cast about him for some test of meaning which would show, to every candid mind, the emptiness of these abstractions. He found the weapon which he sought when, in 1878, he came upon an essay by Charles Peirce in the Popular Science Monthly on How to Make Our Ideas Clear. To find the meaning of an idea, said Peirce, we must examine the consequences to which it leads in action. Otherwise, dispute about it may be without end, and will surely be without fruit. This was a lead which James was glad to follow. He tried the problems and ideas of the old metaphysics by this test, and they fell to pieces at its touch like chemical compounds suddenly shot through with a current of electricity. And such problems as had meaning took on a clearness and a reality, as if, in Plato's famous figure, they had passed out of the shadows of a cave into the brilliance of a sunlit noon. This simple and old-fashioned test led James on to a new definition of truth. Truth had been conceived as an objective relation, as once good and beauty had been. Now what if truth, like these, were also relative to human judgment and human needs? Natural laws had been taken as objective truths, eternal and unchangeable. Spinoza had made them the very substance of his philosophy. And yet what were these truths but formulations of experience, convenient and successful in practice? Not copies of an object, but correct calculations of specific consequences. Truth is the cash value of an idea. The true is only the expedient in the way of our thinking, just as the right is only the expedient in the way of our behaving. Expedient is almost any fashion, and expedient in the long run and on the whole, of course. For what meets expediently all the experiences in sight won't necessarily meet all further experiences equally satisfactorily. Truth is one species of good, and not, as is usually supposed, a category distinct from good and coordinate with it. The true is the name of whatever proves itself to be good in the way of belief. Truth is a process and happens to an idea. Verity is verification. Instead of asking whence an idea is derived or what are its premises, pragmatism examines its results. It shifts the emphasis and looks forward. It is the attitude of looking away from first things, principles, categories, supposed necessities, and of looking towards last things, fruits, consequences, facts. Scholasticism asked, what is the thing, and lost itself in quiddities. Darwinism asked, what is its origin, and lost itself in nebulas. Pragmatism asks, what are its consequences, and turns the face of thought to action and the future. Pluralism. Let us apply this method to the oldest problem in philosophy, the existence and nature of God. The scholastic philosophers describe the deity as ens se extra et supra omne genus, necessarium, unum, infinite, perfectum, simplex, immutabile, immensum, aeternum, intelligens. This is magnificent. What deity would not be proud of such a definition? But what does it mean? What are its consequences for mankind? If God is omniscient and omnipotent, we are puppets. There is nothing that we can do to change the course of destiny which His will has from the beginning delineated and decreed. Calvinism and fatalism are the logical corollaries of such a definition. The same test applied to mechanistic determinism issues in the same results. If we really believed in determinism, we would become Hindu mystics and abandon ourselves at once to the immense fatality which uses us as marionettes. Of course, we do not accept these somber philosophies. The human intellect repeatedly proposes them because of their logical simplicity and symmetry, but life ignores and overflows them and passes on. A philosophy may be unimpeachable in other respects, but either of two defects will be fatal to its universal adoption. First, its ultimate principle must not be one that essentially baffles and disappoints our dearest desires and most cherished hopes. But a second and worse defect in a philosophy than contradicting our active propensities is to give them no object whatever to press against. A philosophy whose principle is so incommensurate with our most intimate powers as to deny them all relevancy in universal affairs, as to annihilate their motives at one blow, will be even more unpopular than pessimism. That is why materialism will always fail of universal adoption. Men accept or reject philosophies, then, according to their needs and their temperaments, not according to objective truth. They do not ask, is this logical? They ask, what will the actual practice of this philosophy mean for our lives and our interests? Arguments for and against may serve to illuminate, but they never prove. Logic and sermons never convince. The damp of the night drives deeper into my soul. Now I re-examine philosophies and religions. They may prove well in lecture rooms, yet not prove at all under the spacious clouds, and along the landscape and flowing currents. Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass. We know that arguments are dictated by our needs, and that our needs cannot be dictated to by arguments. The history of philosophy is to a great extent that of a certain clash of human temperaments. Of whatever temperament a professional philosopher is, he tries, when philosophizing, to sink the fact of his temperament. Temperament is no conventionally recognized reason, so he urges impersonal reasons only for his conclusions. Yet his temperament really gives him a stronger bias than any of his more strictly objective premises. These temperaments which select and dictate philosophies may be divided into the tender-minded and the tough-minded. The tender-minded temperament is religious. It likes to have definite and unchanging dogmas and a priori truths. It takes naturally to free will, idealism, monism, and optimism. The tough-minded temperament is materialistic, irreligious, empiricist, going only on facts, sensationalistic, tracing all knowledge to sensation, fatalistic, pluralistic, pessimistic, skeptical. In each group there are gaping contradictions, and no doubt there are temperaments that select their theories partly from one group and partly from the other. There are people, William James, for example, who are tough-minded in their addiction to facts and in their reliance on the senses, and yet tender-minded in their horror of determinism and their need for religious belief. Can a philosophy be found that will harmonize these apparently contradictory demands? James believes that pluralistic theism affords us such a synthesis. He offers a finite God, not an Olympian thunderer sitting aloof on a cloud, but one helper, primus inter pares, in the midst of all the shapers of the great world's fate. The cosmos is not a closed and harmonious system. It is a battleground of cross-currents and conflicting purposes. It shows itself with pathetic obviousness as not a uni but a multiverse. It is useless to say that this chaos in which we live and move is the result of one consistent will. It gives every sign of contradiction and division within itself. Perhaps the ancients were wiser than we, and polytheism may be truer than monotheism to the astonishing diversity of the world. Such polytheism has always been the real religion of common people and is so still today. The people are right and the philosophers are wrong. Monism is the natural disease of philosophers who hunger and thirst not, as they think, for truth, but for unity. The world is one. The formula may become a sort of number worship. 3 and 7 have, it is true, been reckoned as sacred numbers, but abstractly taken, why is 1 more excellent than 43 or than 2,010,000? The answer, of course, is that unity, or one system of laws holding throughout the universe, facilitates explanation, prediction, and control. The value of a multiverse as compared with a universe lies in this, that where there are cross-currents and warring forces, our own strength and will may count and help decide the issue. It is a world where nothing is irrevocably settled and all action matters. A monistic world is for us a dead world. In such a universe we carry out willy-nilly the parts assigned to us by an omnipotent deity or a primeval nebula. And not all our tears can wipe out one word of the eternal script. In a finished universe, individuality is a delusion. In reality, the monist assures us, we are all bits of one mosaic substance. But in an unfinished world we can write some lines of the parts we play, and our choices mold in some measure the future in which we have to live. In such a world we can be free. It is a world of chance and not of fate. Everything is not quite, and what we are or do may alter everything. If Cleopatra's nose, said Pascal, had been an inch longer or shorter, all history would have been changed. The theoretical evidence for such free will, or such a multiverse, or such a finite God, is as lacking as for the opposite philosophies. Even the practical evidence may vary from person to person. It is conceivable that some may find better results for their lives from a deterministic than from a libertarian philosophy. But where the evidence is indecisive, our vital and moral interests should make the choice. If there be any life that it is really better that we should lead, and if there be any idea which, if believed in, would help us to lead that life, then it would be really better for us to believe in that idea, unless, indeed, belief in it incidentally clashed with other greater vital benefits. Now, the persistence of the belief in God is the best proof of its almost universal vital and moral value. James was amazed and attracted by the endless varieties of religious experience and belief. He described them with an artist's sympathy, even where he most disagreed with them. He saw some truth in every one of them, and demanded an open mind toward every new hope. He did not hesitate to affiliate himself with the Society for Psychical Research. Why should not such phenomena, as well as others, be the object of patient examination? In the end, James was convinced of the reality of another, a spiritual world. I firmly disbelieve, myself, that our human experience is the highest form of experience extant in the universe. I believe rather that we stand in much the same relation to the whole of the universe as our canine and feline pets do to the whole of human life. They inhabit our drawing rooms and libraries. They take part in scenes of whose significance they have no inkling. They are merely tangent to curves of history, the beginnings and ends and forms of which pass wholly beyond their ken. So we are tangent to the wider life of things. Nevertheless, he did not think of philosophy as a meditation on death. No problems had value for him unless they could guide and stimulate our terrestrial career. It was with the excellencies, not the duration of our natures, that he occupied himself. He did not live in his study so much as in the current of life. He was an active worker in 100 efforts for human betterment. He was always helping somebody, lifting men up with the contagion of his courage. He believed that in every individual there were reserve energies which the occasional midwifery of circumstance would bring forth. And his constant sermon to the individual and to society was a plea that these resources should be entirely used. He was horrified at the waste of human energy in war, and he suggested that these mighty impulses of combat and mastery could find a better outlet in a war against nature. Why should not every man, rich or poor, give 2 years of his life to the state, not for the purpose of killing other people, but to conquer the plagues, and drain the marshes, and irrigate the deserts, and dig the canals, and democratically do the physical and social engineering which builds up so slowly and painfully what war so quickly destroys? He sympathized with socialism, but he disliked its deprecation of the individual and the genius. Tenn's formula, which reduced all cultural manifestations to race, environment, and time, was inadequate precisely because it left out the individual. But only the individual has value. Everything else is a means, even philosophy. And so we need on the one hand a state which shall understand that it is the trustee and servant of the interests of individual men and women, and on the other a philosophy and a faith which shall offer the universe as an adventure rather than a scheme, and shall stimulate every energy by holding up the world as a place where, though there are many defeats, there are also victories waiting to be won. A shipwrecked sailor buried on this coast bids you set sail. Full many a gallant bark, when we were lost, weathered the gale. Quoted by James in Pragmatism from the Greek Anthology. Comment. The reader needs no guide to the new and the old elements in this philosophy. It is part of the modern war between science and religion. Another effort, like Kant's and Bergson's, to rescue faith from the universalized mechanics of materialism. Pragmatism has its roots in Kant's practical reason, in Schopenhauer's exaltation of the will, in Darwin's notion that the fittest, and therefore also the fittest and truest idea, is that which survives, in utilitarianism, which measured all goods in terms of use, in the empirical and inductive traditions of English philosophy, and finally in the suggestions of the American scene. Certainly, as everyone has pointed out, the manner, if not the substance, of James's thinking was specifically and uniquely American. The American lust for movement and acquisition fills the sails of his style and thought, and gives them a buoyant and almost aerial motility. Honecker calls it a philosophy for Philistines, and indeed there is something that smacks of salesmanship in it. James talks of God as of an article to be sold to a materialistically minded consumer by every device of optimistic advertising. And he counsels us to believe as if he were recommending long-term investments with high dividends, in which there was nothing to lose and all the other world to win. It was young America's defense reaction against European metaphysics and European science. The new test of truth was, of course, an ancient one, and the honest philosopher described pragmatism modestly as a new name for old ways of thinking. If the new test means that truth is that which has been tried by experience and experiment, the answer is, of course. If it means that personal utility is a test of truth, the answer is, of course, not. Personal utility is merely personal utility. Only universal permanent utility would constitute truth. When some pragmatists speak of a belief having been true once because then useful, though now disproved, they utter nonsense learnedly. It was a useful error, not a truth. Pragmatism is correct only if it is a platitude. What James meant to do, however, was to dispel the cobwebs that had entangled philosophy. He wished to reiterate in a new and startling way the old English attitude towards theory and ideology. He was but carrying on the work of Bacon in turning the face of philosophy once more towards the inescapable world of things. He will be remembered for this empirical emphasis, this new realism, rather than for his theory of truth, and he will be honored perhaps more as a psychologist than as a philosopher. He knew that he had found no solution for the old questions. He frankly admitted that he had expressed only another guess, another faith. On his desk, when he died, there lay a paper on which he had written his last and perhaps his most characteristic sentences. There is no conclusion. What is concluded that we might conclude in regard to it? There are no fortunes to be told, and there is no advice to be given. Farewell.